Hello everybody, Ben Woodruff here, and in today's video, this is going to be kind of a fun one because we're going to be doing a little bit of experimental archaeology. We are going to be creating and replicating an ancient artifact that was found at Chetro Ketl at Chaco Canyon. We're going to be replicating it and assessing what we learn by making it. Now, this is experimental archaeology. So really quick, what is experimental archaeology? Well, normally when we're dealing with archaeology, we're dealing with the material goods left over that humans have left behind, you know, physical, tangible things that humans have altered the world around them. What do we learn from that? Well, there's a lot of armchair archaeology. There's a lot of speculation that we can make, but sometimes there's new insights we can glean by actually replicating these processes. And in fact, sometimes it can radically change our views of what was currently before that an archaeological assumption. And so let me give you a quick example of experimental archaeology, a little thing I did here. So in ancient Egypt, so shifting gears a little here from the southwestern United States, but in ancient Egypt, we find these magic wands, and these magic wands are made out of hippo tusks. And hippos are considered an Isfet animal, a darkness animal, hiddenness, formlessness, associated, kind of devilish in a way. If you're looking maybe like in a Judeo-Christian view, the devilish view, okay? So these magic wands were made from half of a hippo tusk, and they would have magic spells and magic writing on them, and the user would use them by cursing away bad things. So the idea was, hey, you're sick, that's a bad thing. Well, I'm going to use this badder thing to bat against the bad. So if you're sick, I'm going to take this evil hippo tusk and use it to curse away the curse you have of sickness. So instead of good versus bad, it's badder versus you're bad. But you had to have control of it, and it was very simple magic. It was done. You just took the hippo tusk, and you had to know the person's real name. When you were born, you had your real name and the name that people knew you by. Only your mom and the goddess Isis knew your real name. But if you tell it to the local healer, hey, here's this guy's real name, he's sick, they would take this hippo tusk and say, I curse away the sickness that you have, or I curse away your pain by the actual name. And just basically whatever you said would happen if you did it with the person's real name. So I wanted to, I was doing an Egyptian demonstration a few years ago, and I wanted to replicate a hippo tusk wand. And then I was going to carve it out of wood. And then I thought, you know what? I want to do the real thing, do a little experimental archaeology. So I managed to acquire a hippo tusk, and I proceeded to cut it in half. Now, cutting it in half was no small task. I used a modern day metal bandsaw, and it took 4 hours. This is not bone, this is ivory. And to cut it lengthwise took 4 hours. And halfway through, it broke the blade, and I had to put a new blade on. So splitting it in half, well, not splitting, splitting's the wrong term. It looks like it would just be wood or bone, just split it. So then then I replicated this with the proper spells. So again, an ancient healer in Egypt would hold it in the middle and would call you by whatever your real name is and say, so-and-so, may the poison of the scorpion come out, or may the headache you have, in your head, go away. And very simple magic. So what did I learn by actually making this? Well, what I learned, nobody's ever brought this up. It is an incredible amount of work. I was using an electric motorized bandsaw, and that was iron, that was steel, right? Steel, cutting through this. The Egyptians didn't have that. The strongest metal they had was bronze, which is not all that strong. And they also had, obsidian. They had, tools like this, made with obsidian. They had some flint, some chert. So in other words, and it drops. So in other words, to make this took a tremendous amount of work and effort. It would have taken days and days and days of just nonstop cutting to cut through something like this. Why do that? You might as well just have the whole thing as a whole, right? Why not just say, hey, we're going to have this hippo tusk, and we'll heal you with it. So why go to the effort of splitting it? Well, that is taking control of that dark magic. The hippo tusk on its own was considered, we know it was considered an evil item. And if you just gave somebody just a whole hippo tusk in ancient Egypt, that's very bad. And so by cutting it, you were taking control of that magic. And so by making my own, I learned how much effort it would actually take to do that, and learned that that was part of the process. That was part of, taking over that dark magic and being able to wield it to do good. Okay, so that's experimental archaeology. That's a basic version. But what we like to do is we will like to replicate a process or a craft made by ancient people and then write down what we learned, especially how much time it took. So we're going to talk about an item from Chetro Ketl. Now, Chetro Ketl is a great house in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. You zoom into it from outer space here. It's only been excavated once. A lot of interesting information. I'm going to be doing a video in much more depth about this site in the coming months, and we'll go visit it again. But at Chetro Ketl, it's right next to Pueblo Bonito. Pueblo Bonito is more famous. It's a more intact site, but these great houses had hundreds of rooms, and they, these are people who are living here from, about like 990 AD to about 1250 AD. Among the site, a lot of wooden artifacts were found. Now, we don't normally get too excited about that. At Chaco Canyon had a rich and vibrant ritual-based economy. There were exotic goods coming in from down south, from Mexico. I bring this up a lot in the videos, but just to bring it up again, there were copper bells, which the manufacturing of copper bells back then took a tremendous amount of work. There was cacao beans that were brought up from the Puerto Vallarta region. These were very sacred, and these were incorporated as well and drunk from chacoan cacao mugs. We've tested the residue in these mugs and find that there is theobromine, which is chocolate, which is cacao. So we know they were drinking this sacred ritual drink that, again, was being imported. Probably the most exotic thing that came up, well, there was also shells, and there was a lot of minerals. There was shells from the Pacific that came across. But the most exotic thing were the scarlet macaws. We know there were scarlet macaws and military macaws and thick-billed parrots there at Chaco Canyon. This is what we talk about. We think these things are very valuable. Well, at Chetro Ketl, a lot of wooden artifacts were found. These were pretty basic. Now, some of them were kind of elaborate. There were some wooden arrows that were not shootable. These were ceremonial arrows. When I compare a lot of modern Pueblo and descendants and a lot of the ceremonies that they conduct and a lot of the ritual dances they conduct, especially with kachinas, a lot of these items seem of a similar cut. So again, these fake arrows, these kind of ceremonial ritual wooden arrows, where even the fletching is wooden. There's all kinds of, there's like a bird that was kind of like two-dimensional planks put together. There was a lot of items that kind of represented flowers. And there was also something that represented sort of like a crown or a headdress of feathers. Now, this item, this is not exactly the same, but I couldn't help when I first saw this from, the archaeological dig in the 1900s, early 1900s. I thought, you know what this reminds me of, because it is representative of different bird feathers put together to make a crest. But this is made out of wood. So I thought, you know what, I know from one of my books that in the Pacific, I know there in California there was a tribe that made headdresses out of woodpecker scalps. And they would stack them up and put them up together, and they had meaning, and they would wear these headdresses. This is not exactly the same size or shape, but this is wooden, and it is meant to represent something that's feathered. And the same thing with these arrows. Like I said, those fake arrows, they have wooden fletching. These are dance or ceremonial or ritual arrows of some kind. Same thing with whatever this headdress is. So I thought, this thing gets no attention. I've never heard anybody talk about this. Like, wow, this wooden fake headdress of fake feathers made out of wood. Ooh, nobody ever talks about it, because by today's standards, it's boring. Because by today's standards, this would be very easy to make. But I got thinking about it, and this would be very hard to make with primitive tools and would have more value. So I thought, you know what, I want to actually try to replicate this. Now, looking at it, so my thinking was, this has got to be made out of cottonwood. The two main woods we find at Chaco Canyon are ponderosa pines, and the ponderosa pines came from like 50, 60 miles away from the Chushka Mountains. The Chacoans were shipping these over on foot, and these made all the beams for all the layers of all their masonry that went up, 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 you know, as much as 5 stories tall. Pueblo Bonito, these were hauled. But that's what they were used for. So what wood is local? Well, Chaco Canyon is and was pretty desolate, but along the rivers there are cottonwood trees. Now, cottonwood trees are very soft, and they, this is another clip from another area, but anywhere you can see these cottonwoods are following the river system. Cottonwoods anywhere in the Southwest, if there's water, you will have cottonwood trees growing along it, always. And cottonwood it's a pretty soft wood, but more importantly, the outer bark is very thick. We know today many Puebloan people still to this day do their wood carvings out of cottonwood bark. The bark is thick. It might be on a really big one. Some of these bark chunks might be that thick coming out from the tree. And you can cut off the outside of this without harming the tree because it just layers up, and it's just like building armor. We know that traditionally the Kachina dolls that are so famous in today's world and in the art world, we know Kachina dolls were made out of cottonwood. It would stand to reason that this item, this fake wooden headdress, was made out of cottonwood bark. But more importantly, when I looked at the widths and the measurements, I'm like, okay, well, there's kind of a size that the bark strips off in, and it really makes sense. If I was making this out of pine, I would have made each wedge a lot bigger, and it would have taken less work. But these are about the width of cottonwood bark. So I thought, you know what? We know cottonwood bark is very accessible in Chaco Canyon, and it's about the only wood that is. I think it is made out of cottonwood bark, so that's what I'm going to go with. So for this experiment, I'm making that jump, but it's a reasonable assumption. It doesn't make sense that it would be any other type of wood. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to replicate this using primitive tools, using obsidian and using flint, trying different ways, then trying to paint it. So what I'm going to do is, upon making all of this, then I'm going to show how much time it took for each of these. Now to do this, because I want to get the project done, so what I would do is I would like cut 2 panels and I would carve them and shape them with primitive tools, and then I did all the rest with like a modern utility knife, and then it's like, okay, well, how long does that take? Then I'll just add it up because it took 13 panels. And then for the paint, I did the one section of paint with hide glue and earth pigments, and then I did all the rest with acrylic. But I'm just going to add what took for the first amount and add it up. So what we're going to do is we're going to show this process, how this works, and then I'm going to give you at the end kind of my takeaway on what I learned from making this. And here's the finished product. You know, kind of a headdress piece. It's a little flexible. It's very vibrant and bright. It's very lightweight. And on the back, nothing. Stitched together with sinew, but I'll get into this more. So let's go ahead and put this thing together, show this process on how this is made. So going along the river, here's some dogwood, and we go and we find ourselves some cottonwood bark. Now stripping the bark, again, you can strip it without hurting the actual tree if you're just getting the outer bark, which is incredibly thick. I stripped it down with a blade made out of Wyoming tiger chert. And once I got enough of these pieces together, these are all about the right width, but now we have to thin them down and cut off that outer bark. The tools that I brought to use, I brought a lot of knives and blades that I've made out of obsidian and chert and flint, tiger chert, a wide range of things. And these, I tried all of these, and only some of them worked halfway decent. So you got to split things down, and I kind of did sort of a hatchet job here. This is a piece of Wyoming oil chert. It's very stiff, it's very strong compared to obsidian. It's got a pretty good blade, but I sort of cut that, and then you got a nice flake there, nice piece, and it's time to carve. So I tried using that same oil chert. It did pretty good. But again, I'm so used to using metal knives and utility knives that this was very frustrating, the amount of time it took. But I wanted to try different types of rocks, different types of stones to see what would work better. So I took a different type of denser, glacier chert, and again, it was still just kind of struggling. I tried more in a more nuanced way than this, but it's hard to actually do this and film, but you get an idea of what it takes. It takes a lot more work than with the metal knife. I went ahead and used this is a type of chert from the Jurassic period, and it was doing pretty good at carving, and I was making some headway, but it was taking its merry time. So eventually I switched to obsidian. This is just a regular spall, just a big old obsidian flake that I've chipped razor sharp, and this did the best. It has no handle, and yet I tried different angles, different approaches, and this seemed to work the best. Now, after trying all these techniques and having obsidian work the best, I made my first 2 planks, my first 2 little panels, and averaged out, for all the rest I used these modern tools, but for these first 2 I carved these completely using primitive techniques, and it's looking at about 8 to 10 minutes to make one of these. Now, to sand it down, rather than using sandpaper, just did the good old-fashioned trick and just used a rock to kind of save myself some time. And normally I would use sandpaper or use a nice metal knife, but this works well, and I think this is pretty accurate to what was done for the ancient pieces. Now, eventually I got all the panels laid out, and again, you can see these are the kind of tools I used. I had them all made up, and again, I made the original 2 and then added the rest. The rest I made with modern tools, and I'll just do the math to add up what it would take. Now I got to bundle them home, but I got to make sure they're in the right order, so I used some yucca rope that I made. I'm not including that in the total time of making the yucca rope, but I bundled them up, took it home. Once I had them home, I made sure that they were all in the correct order that I bundled them in, and then it's time to start painting. But I got to drill first, so I used this drill bit. This is just a stone drill, and I drilled each hole. I did the first 2 with that, and I did the rest with a modern drill. So I drilled a total of 8 holes with the stone drill and did all the rest. But even with a modern drill, this took quite a bit of work because the wood is very delicate and very breakable, and if you drill through too fast, either with a stone drill or a metal drill, it will shatter the entire piece of wood. Then it's time for painting. Again, I did the first 2 panels with earth pigments and hide glue, which takes a tremendous amount of time. And then I did all the rest of them with modern acrylic paint. And then I will just add up the total to understand if they were all done with that ancient method, how long it would take to do the entire thing. So getting it all painted, and then and the holes are already drilled, so now it's time to lace. So I used imitation sinew for most. I used 2 panels, I used real sinew, and the rest I used the imitation sinew. And you gotta lace it with a needle. So here's the drill bit that I used to drill those first 2 panels, the holes in those first 2 panels. And then I'm gonna use a needle that I made out of woolly mammoth ivory, and I'm going to use this to lace up the whole thing. So lacing is a pain. You have to lace and tie between each panel, but it ends up looking all right, and it replicates very well what we see in the original piece that I'm replicating. Now again, the final product here, you can see it is quite flexible, and I don't think that was the intention of the people doing this. I don't think they were trying to make it that way. But I think this piece does pretty good at replicating what the original would have actually looked like. So to come back with some useful stats here, to make these 13 panels, it took me 8 to 10 minutes to carve each panel. It took about 1 minute per hole to be drilled. Lacing took 2.3 hours. Painting took 4 hours. The harvest time was 1 hour. Acquiring the pigments and rendering the hide glue, everything total comes up to, if this was all done the primitive way, this would have taken about 10 hours of work. So factor that in when you understand the worth and value of this object to the ancient people. Well, I hope you enjoyed just a little bit of an experimental archaeology session. Chetro Ketl is an incredible site. I will be going there. It's August of 2025. I'll be going there in November again, and I will be recording much more in-depth videos. If you're watching this video after the fact, then you can probably see a video down in the comments. But again, what have I learned from making this? Well, it took a lot more time than I would have expected. So I identified this as a ritual item. And again, the assumption, even of the archaeologists who uncovered the original, is that it was utilized and attached in some way as some sort of a headdress, some sort of ceremonial thing. It is meant to replicate bird feathers. Specifically, it looks like, you know, a lot of flicker feathers, which are a bird associated with love and fire, and the bird that taught ancient people how to make the love flute. So it's a little flexible, but I don't believe that's believe that's intentional, because again, this is stitched together. Again, I use sinew, add imitation sinew, but I think that's just to hold it together. I believe this item is meant to be as rigid as it can be, and was probably used in dances and ceremonies. I think that this had great value. I think the amount of time it took to make this is ridiculous. Doing it with modern tools would be so much faster. And so I think the fact that it took as long as it did, that this would have been a highly prized item. Again, the Chaco Canyon would get excited about things like cacao beans and copper bells and live macaws and fancy shells. And just some basic cottonwood carving, it's easy to dismiss this. But the amount of time it took and the amount of color and vibrance and brilliance, I think this was a very valuable ritual and ceremonial object. And I think we should give a little more attention to the effort it took to make these kind of items and not just dismiss them as just a basic wooden item. So I hope you enjoyed that little journey with me. And if you haven't already, if you could hit subscribe, I very much appreciate it. It helps me keep this channel up and going. And always remember that life is a gift. So never stop learning and never stop exploring. We'll see you next time.